Hello there.
The cinema courtroom is now in session.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back to the Cinema Courtroom, a podcast where your favorite blockbusters await trial with your host and galactic judge, Makram Mark. Do not forget to like and subscribe on whatever streaming platform that you're listening to, whether it be Spotify, SoundCloud, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel, because every click on the icon counts. Don't forget to ring the notification bell and share this podcast with your friends, family, cat, dog, pigeon, whomever. Now, without further ado, let us review Everything Everywhere All at Once with a review that is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Enjoy. I would just like to start by saying this. Everything Everywhere All at Once is everything everywhere, all at fucking bloody once. We are living in grinding circumstances in the film industry, where, it's easy to make the assertion that, just as Everything Everywhere All at Once suggests, nothing matters in the movie industry anymore. I mean, there have been unpredictable patterns of which screenplays have been a success or have received a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes, a 1 out of 10 on IMDb, a 7 out of 10 on IGN. Some movies were outright mediocre, some should have been dark, but instead turned out to be picnic and butterflies. Some were butchered sequels to critically acclaimed franchises on the chopping board. Some were good, but have put a larger emphasis on diversity quotas rather than a masterful script. Some were okay at first, but the more I rewatch it, the more I want to stomp on a pigeon until it suffers a slow and gruesome death, because that bad movie was the textbook definition of bad, mediocre. Now, some were really good, and I would easily rewatch that movie again. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Everything Everywhere All at Once is one of those movies that is really good, and I would easily rewatch again, but so much more. Everything Everywhere All at Once is frickin' phenomenal. I have to say this right off the bat. The movie is absolute bonkers. Michelle Yeoh, as usual, nails her performance. You also get to witness a Jackie Chan moment with the character Waymond, which was so perplexing and entertaining to behold. The soundtrack is decent. Like, this movie is literally Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it is the real multiverse of madness. Doctor Strange, I love you, man, but only as a friend, because your adaptation of the multiverse is inferior. Okay, so Everything Everywhere All at Once is an indie film that put Chinese Americans at the forefront of the story. Cool. It is split into 3 parts. Part 1, Everything. Part 2, Everywhere. And the final part, All at Once. Hence, the title, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because it's comprised of the 3 parts. Michelle Yeoh plays a Chinese American woman who operates a small family-run business, which is a laundromat that is about to be seized by the IRS, right? And this character, Evelyn, soon discovers that she's able to converse even, with the multiverse, which is more of one universe, and even converse with her husband, alt self. And there is a villain, although you find out she isn't really a villain per se, as the film progresses, and she goes by the alias Jobu Tupaki. Now, Jobu Tupaki's minions can also jump from one multiverse to another. How convenient. And Evelyn is called to prevent Jobu Tupaki, who we later to find out to be her daughter, from wreaking havoc in the multiverse. This whole concept is just pure genius, because not only do we find out that the Joby Topaki villain is Evelyn's daughter, she takes the audience on a long journey that we've never seen before and gives us an exposition to her broken world that was Evelyn's own doing. You see, we see Joby Topaki's world, bagels. I'm just mentioning a few things out of context, because when you take one aspect of the movie out of context, it just feels, weird and out of place. I mean, who would have thought, you would whack a bunch of guards with penises? And Evelyn is portrayed as an unaccepting, strict, and overprotective mother, and as a result, it makes the daughter depressed. There are also some very beautiful visuals that show us, like countless other universes, like each, universe, in fact, is composed of various different choices that humans make, that we make, and there are universes that are straight up weird, as I've kept saying, and mind-blowing. Like sausage fingers for hands, just two rocks having a philosophical dialogue on the edge of a cliff, a comedic ripoff of Ratatouille, Raccoony, which I found to be so comedic that I burst out laughing. Like, I've never laughed this hard watching a movie this year in 2022. And there's even a reality where Evelyn is a martial artist, essentially the female iteration of Jackie Chan. Although nothing can suppress, and no one can suppress, the Jackie Chan. All right, let's get this misconception out of the way. If you think Jackie Chan can be, matched in the Chinese kung fu genre, I think you need to have a reality check. But anyway, Evelyn is also, in one of the multiversal realities, a rich woman who neglects her future husband, but somehow he finds his way to her anyway, through destiny. Can I also just say that the husband, Waymond, was an enjoyable character to watch on screen? Now, I forgot to mention in opening of this review that I haven't actually seen Everything Everywhere All at Once on the large screen, because unfortunately, it was banned in the country that I'm living in. So I watched it on digital a few months later than everyone else who's got the privilege to see this gorgeous movie on the gorgeous big screen on IMAX. But, wouldn't it have been cool if I just saw Waymond do his karate and stuff on the big screen? Because he was that much of an enjoyable character to see. And also, Waymond manages to play two different people and switch back to his normal self flawlessly. It's as if, he's one actor, of course, but it's as if we're hearing two different actors. But they're wearing the same clothing, they share the same body, maybe perhaps the same genetics, but they're two different people. Except, it's just, Waymond, the actor who plays him, I forgot the name, it's just so convincing. And also, his message toward the end that talked about how he saw himself as a fighter, like Evelyn, but in a different way, was so good. Like, that whole speech was what this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, has culminated to. Just be kind. Like, all this chaos that's happening, we don't know how each person in life navigates that chaos. And they might fall short, they might be successful, they could manage, right? But some people aren't as lucky, which is why we should, Waymond is essentially saying to be compassionate toward others, you know. Um, and another thing, Wayman's character arc just adds on to the element incorporated from the black comedy and martial arts genre that encircles this movie. Especially when he, as I mentioned, he is the master of karate, and he swings a bag of rocks and gives security people an ass whooping. It was so well done and executed. I really thought that this martial arts scene was going to be like, the only action driven moment that we were going to get from this film, and I'm so glad that I couldn't have been more wrong. Like, with the exception of the first 20 minutes of groundwork for their story, it was action packed throughout all of the first, the third, and final acts. In fact, perhaps I might even criticize, if I were to criticize this movie, I think the only criticism would be that the first 20 minutes wasn't long enough to build the groundwork. If I were to make any criticism toward this fabulous movie, but every multiverse felt freaking alive, man. Like a bunch of monkeys escaping a heavily guarded zoo. They're just jumping up and down, and you're trying to keep up, but you give up eventually on trying to understand what's going on, and your eyes are just glued on the screen. And there's this one scene where Jobu Tsupaki and Evelyn are fighting, and there's a brief moment where as they are fighting, the background changes to the different multiverse backdrops, and I might have to rewatch that scene again to see what multiverse was exhibited, because there were like so freaking many, probably even more so than Doctor Strange for sure. And another thing, one more thing I want to add before I talk about how movies of this kind, if it even exists or not, right? It's that this movie really took its time to explore philosophical concepts of what is the meaning of life, and nihilistic themes to top it off. The cherry on top. It was perfect. Now, very often, movies of this kind is too good to be true, right? And if I were to critique Everything Everywhere All at Once, it would probably be how some of the elements were confusing at first. But the more I think about it now, I just want to take that criticism back, because, whenever you get confused about something, or if it is explained so rapidly that it's hard to keep up, it either expands on that concept or reminds you about it again. See, in case you don't get it the first time. So we're immersed into Evelyn's journey, as she is also confused and is also trying to navigate a bunch of universes, which can sometimes be overwhelming. No shit, right? And not every film can immerse an audience and give you a roller coaster experience. Everything Everywhere All at Once manages to do that to an effective degree. And not to mention, by the way, as I was watching this movie, it made me laugh and stare at the screen in existential horror. Okay? And heck, and I know I'm exaggerating here, I forgot that I existed for a second. This movie just widens your perspective on so many ideas. It is what makes the scene with the rocks so well done. Because for a few good, relaxing minutes, you just want to read text on the screen. And again, the same message is re-emphasized throughout the course of this movie. Nothing matters. But you know what does matter? Your own thoughts and opinions about Everything Everywhere All at Once. Let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about this movie? Do you think it was, how I saw the movie, a phenomenal masterpiece of 2022? Or do you think this movie is overrated? Or do you think it's underrated? Or whatever you think about this movie, let me know your valuable insights. And I'll see you next time for the next movie review. And now we begin to approach the post-sentencing hearing. What is the post-sentencing hearing? Well, I'm glad you asked. In the first half of the Cinema Courtroom podcast, we review one of the films that I have selected. Old and new, big and small, underrated and overrated, The Broken and the Damned, Black, White, Brown, Orange, and Blue. Then, in the second half of the recording, I assemble all of the leftover topics that pertain to the film industry in general and integrate it into one post-sentencing hearing list. Think of it as an after-party that is long overdue, where you are invited, or in judiciary terms, an invitation to a retrial in order to rectify an unfair hearing. Because sometimes, like the organic sapien that I am, I find that I've been too critically generous or harsh about a movie. So most of the time, my opinions do change after a rewatch or two, which means I'm compelled to review it again in a post-sentencing hearing. If you listen this far into the podcast, then I salute you for sticking around to the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show. If you enjoy what you've heard from the first half and what I have to say in the Cinema Courtroom show, if you haven't done so already, I would very much appreciate it if you give this podcast a reshare and like this episode by clicking the thumbs up or heart icon on whatever platform that you're listening on. Spotify, SoundCloud, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel. Shout out to anyone who's watching it on the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel premiere, by the way. You get it over an hour early before all your friends at Spotify and SoundCloud. By liking this episode, you will be supporting the Cinema Courtroom, as well as its future episodes, installments, and assets. That being said, I salute you in advance for your generous engagement and support, and I hope you continue to join us in the ride to success. We're only going to talk about one topic in this hearing, which is, can Marvel Studios remain a lucrative franchise forever? It is of no surprise to any ordinary film-going audience that Marvel Cinematic Films have had a track record of making the box office their bitch. And since we're living in a COVID-19 era, film studios need to make the box office their bitch more than ever in order to break even and justify the insane production costs and scheduling and, accommodating social distancing guidelines. There have been instances where, for instance, like actors, I've listened to on a podcast actually, another one, that actors were not allowed to be in the same trailer or makeup room for more than a certain time quota. So that kind of delayed production a bit. And the MCU, Marvel Studios, it's no different, considering that they need to continue their box office wins in order to break even for the extra costs that they're paying. Now, there have been clear data that indicated that Marvel Studios has dominated the box office. Let's see here. We got Spider-Man No Way Home that launched into theaters in the Christmas of 2021. Avengers Endgame in 2019. I mean, look, we're not going to shy away from the fact that some of their movies was in the top 10 box office list, such as, Lord of the Rings. To say the least, Marvel is sharing a box office banquet table among the best of movies. So, according to the Business Insider, it states that at the start of 2022, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness has outgrossed the first movie after 2 weekends. And also, they took care to mention that after Insider ranked all 28 movies by their global box office, they managed to not only break even, some of them actually broke $1 billion. $1 billion to be precise. Avengers Endgame, despite having been re-released so it can beat Avatar's record of being a number 1 movie, they got past $1 billion shy in the box office. So in total, the MCU has managed to earn more than $25 worldwide, which makes it one of the most largest bigger-than-life movie franchises ever. So, for instance, I'm still reading the Deadline article because I think we shouldn't underestimate how much Marvel is making money and was making money in the box office. So, The Incredible Hulk, right? Its worldwide box office was $264.7 million. Let's talk about, Black Widow. Black Widow was a film, it was actually the first Marvel Studios movie that was released in the pandemic era, and it managed to consolidate $379.6 million. We're talking about millions, okay, in opening weekends. And not to mention, it also was accessible on Disney Plus on the same day, considering that so many of its audience had to self-quarantine and they weren't able to go to the theaters, or perhaps they were too cautious to go to the cinema, despite there being, despite it still being open in a majority of places. So, as you can see, Marvel will not ever reach they won't ever face the epiphany of not breaking even and making a profit for a long time to come. But, we need to think about, can Marvel Studios remain a lucrative franchise forever? Because there have been instances where the general audience, MCU fans alike, and me included, have caught on when it came to the quality drop in some movies. Now, I'm not saying the CGI is bad, nor am I suggesting that the MCU isn't fun to watch. Again, I'm a Team Marvel participant, okay? I've always been Team Marvel. DC, I also really love the Batman. I love Superman. I love Wonder Woman. I'm not a Marvel fanatic, okay? If Marvel makes a mistake, I'm gonna call that shit out. Likewise, if DC makes a mistake or has a drop on quality, I'm gonna call it out. And sometimes, if they have a pattern of this inconsistent quality, one movie it's good, one movie it's alright, and the other movie is bad, okay, then maybe I won't buy a ticket next time. And if other people who watch the MCU have the same mindset as I do, then they're also not going to buy tickets. And you know what's going to happen? That could affect whether or not Marvel Studios could remain a lucrative franchise forever, because the box office would essentially go down. Now, when I'm talking about quality, as I've mentioned previously, I'm not talking about CGI or entertaining elements, because I'm sure Marvel's is going to have that consistency when it comes to entertainment and CGI till the end of time. I'm talking about their screenplays. In Thor Ragnarok, Asgard was literally destroyed. Okay, a dimension in space that was around for thousands and thousands of years. Having it destroyed can't just be, brushed to aside with a joke that a character makes. I mean, it shouldn't. Yet it was. Like, when they escape Asgard and we see it collapse before our very eyes, Korg proceeds to make the jokeful assertion that, perhaps, we can still rebuild what's left of Asgard. Then, boom, whatever's left of it got blown up straight after he said that. And it was just to instill some, humorous irony in a scene that's meant to be forlorn. It's supposed to be sad, tragic. We are supposed to cry watching a city that we've all grown to love in Thor and For the Dark World, and any mentions of it in the Avengers. We were grown to have a sense of kinship with Asgard and all of the citizens living there. We're supposed to resonate with it, We're supposed to grieve with the characters. But what does Thor Ragnarok do? They turn it into a gag. They think it's, a laughing matter. Now look, I'm not opposed to seeing Marvel movies become late night comedy shows. I don't mind seeing the MCU instill corny humor, because hey, people seem to love it, so as a business you want to appease demand. That's all there is to it. But my problem is it's that the script doesn't always go first. In fact, Marvel Studios, probably believes in the notion that because they are a lucrative franchise, they can create any movie they want. But I want you guys to ask yourself this question. If Marvel Studios had not been a leading franchise if an indie movie, let's say, Everything Ever All at Once. Now, you've probably never heard of that movie before it's been released, right? But what if that movie was, was done in a similar way to, for instance, the recent Phase 4 MCU movies? Would you give it a positive word of mouth? I don't think you would, because A, it's an indie movie, and B, it didn't give you a good first impression. Now, of course, I've reviewed Everything Ever All at Once on this podcast, and it is phenomenal. But I wouldn't say the same thing for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. In all of its good graces, in all of its fun moments, heartfelt even, and some original concepts incorporated into the movie. With all of that, compared to Everything Ever All at Once, I wouldn't say it's superior. In fact, I would say it's inferior to Everything Everywhere All at Once. So as you can, gather from what I've said, Marvel Studios could get suppressed by caliber screenplays that other movies would create. And if there are enough movies that seem to be telling rich stories, visuals, art, and beat movies like Thor: Love and Thunder, which I've already seen, then Marvel Studios could have a bit of a hard time maintaining liquidity. It's not going to be able to compete as effectively if those movies happen to consolidate the box office. So what I'm really trying to say is, yes, Marvel Studios will remain a lucrative franchise, but forever may not be in the cards if they, if they don't up their game. If they don't write scripts that don't, insert corny humor. Which, by the way, I don't mind at all. In fact, for some reason, right? Even though I've recently got fed up of corny humor and silly lines that go along, phrases such as, "Come on, we need to get out of here." And then Jeremy Nipples would turn to character X and be like, "Look at your face. Ha 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 ha." What's the point of that joke? It's not funny, but we're supposed to laugh in the theater. It'll be awkward not to laugh, because that's how Marvel Studios, that's what Marvel expects us to do, essentially. Like, when they're not trying to be funny, they're pretty hilarious sometimes. Like, some serious there were, like, a couple of serious moments in one particular Marvel film, and I couldn't help but be like, "Oh, yeah, that's funny. They did that." Because it's so typical of Marvel and Hollywood to give us those type of moments. And it wasn't like I resonated with any of them. So, yeah. What I'm trying to say is, I just want a script that tries to be perfect. That would, help alter the tides of storytelling in the film industry and give us rich storylines. Give us something, that could live up to movies like The Godfather, Lord of the Rings, which I believe the one movie in the MCU that has managed to do that. And by the way, this doesn't affect whether or not it's in my top 10 Marvel Studios films, because I'm only talking about how it is as a movie. Okay? I think the only one of the few films that have been able to do that was Iron Man. Just Iron Man. Because, A, it was not originally meant to be a connected universe. Sure, there was a post-credits scene where Nick Fury said there's a bigger universe, but you just don't know it yet. They didn't really have a concise plan of what was going to happen up until Phase 4, or Phase 2 or 3 for that matter. So, all Marvel wanted to do was focus on giving us a satisfying, well-written story. And that's what Iron Man did. Because think about it. You don't need to watch any Marvel movie to understand Iron Man. Because it is the first Marvel movie that in fact you need to watch to get started with. To understand the rest of Marvel. Because it's all interconnected now. But the thing about Iron Man was you could make a good movie about a man who profiteers over selling weapons of destruction, including to Afghanistan. There were a group of terrorists that utilized those weapons, that severely harmed people, and Tony Stark represented the American military. Like, they're the one. Like, think about it. They're the ones who fund, some of the terrorism that's been ongoing. And this movie didn't shy away from this kind of problem. So it was a movie that was relevant to the time it was released in. It wasn't only a superhero movie. And also it illustrated how one could change and become a selfless, righteous hero and protect everyone. Like, it's a universal message that's being ingrained in the consciousness of the audience. That's what I really respect about Iron Man. Because, again, they had no motive to make it a connected universe where everything is going to be just CGI blockbuster. It used the budget it had, not knowing if it was going to be a success, and they made the best movie they could. And that's what made Marvel Studios a lucrative franchise to begin with, and that is what's going to make Marvel Studios stay a lucrative franchise, possibly forever, if they start getting writers who are going to be committed throughout our lifetime to make a movie like Iron Man. And perhaps I forgot to mention a few other MCU movies that may have incorporated some of those caliber elements that we need a movie to present to the audience. So, now that I've established whether or not Marvel Studios can remain a lucrative franchise forever, what do you guys think about this topic? Do you think Marvel Studios will continue to consolidate the box office? Or perhaps do you think we're going to catch on long enough for Marvel to stop being a lucrative franchise? Because, we're not stupid. We know if the MCU has had the decline of quality. Again, not because of CGI, it's because of the dialogue from the script. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments below on whatever streaming platform that you're listening to this podcast on. We have now reached the end of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cinema Courtroom Show, where we critiqued movies. I had a lot of fun doing this podcast, so make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed episode 4 of the Cinema Courtroom. And I hope to see you guys again in the next episode where we're going to talk about my top Marvel Studio movie list. And I'm going to let you know my all-time favorite MCU film in that episode. Episode 5 of the Cinema Courtroom. Keep your eyes out on when the next episode will launch on the YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spotify platform. Thank you once again for listening till the end. I am your galactic judge, Mark, and I hope you have a spectacular day.
Hello there.
Court is now